Now it's time for today's perspective, and it's been a busy weekend of political persuading here in France as the candidates in the presidential election head into their last 2 weeks before the first round of voting. Now, in 2 weeks' time, in fact, we will know then who is out, who is left in the race for the presidency. This weekend saw the biggest rally planned for the far-right candidate Eric Zemmour, with the Eiffel Tower in the background there. Thousands of his supporters bussed in from across the country. The other far-right candidate, Marine Le Pen, she was jeered, in fact, by protesters in the French overseas territory of Guadeloupe, who streamed into a hotel where she was recording a television programme. And the far left's Jean-Luc Mélenchon, he held a rally in the southern French port city of Marseille. Just some of those politicians rallying this weekend. Well, we're going to talk now to our regular Monday guest for the next few weeks. It's Andrew Smith. He's senior lecturer in contemporary history and politics at the University of Chichester. Good to have you with us once again, Andrew. We saw there those images of Eric Zemmour, his big rally there. Do you think this is his last chance, or was his last chance, to galvanise some support?
Well, I think that's an important point you make. He very much has not had the momentum in recent weeks. That has really been draining out of his campaign. Of course, we've seen a lot of commentary on his quite approving stance in terms of Vladimir Putin. We've seen a lot of sort of unapologetic stances around his, endorsement of those types of authoritarian discourse, because they're so strongly tied to his views on kind of civilizational politics and about these kind of, quite nativist ideas which he puts across. Now, I think that's quite important because, a lot of his focus has been on what he calls the union of the rights. And of course, you saw the big rally. He's got kind of pumped up with people like Marion Maréchal Le Pen, of course, Philippe de Villiers as well. Like a lot of people who are kind of tied to this wider sphere of right-wing activism. Admittedly, he has lost some people on the right. He was always very friendly with Robert Ménard, who was the Rassemblement National kind of affiliated mayor down in Béziers, who sort of split from him over his comments on refugees. That's the idea that people like Zemmour have been very, very negative about the prospect of humanitarian action, accepting refugees, and constantly casting about conspiracy theories about where people come from and all the rest of it. And there's a lot of violence in that language as well. Of course, at the rally, one of the things that people have been talking about a lot is we had someone in the crowd, screaming about Macron being a murderer and all this kind of nonsense, really. But of course, a lot of people have come out and criticised Zemmour for not sort of, playing that down or trying to correct that on the day. Valérie Pécresse, of course, who at the moment has COVID, unfortunately. Her campaign, again, also slightly ailing, but she kind of said that's the kind of moment when a candidate needs to step in. And of course, we can look to the past as well. Somebody like Jacques Chirac, of course, another famous face of the centre-right in France. He always kind of said that kind of aggressive language, that kind of real ramping up, is good for the militants, but it's not what ordinary people in France want to see. And I think that's perhaps reflected in the political fortunes that Zemmour is experiencing. So as you say, a big moment where he tries to rally opinion, a big moment where he tries again to brook controversy across all of this moment, but also something where, I think probably his message is starting to fall flat with many French people.
So he's the furthest on the right of the candidates left. Furthest on the left, of course, is Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He had a big rally in Marseille, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. So another big rally for a rally for the Sixth Republic, as he calls them, down in Marseille. Of course, you mentioned earlier on Marine Le Pen getting jeered in overseas France. Of course, that's one of the places that Jean-Luc Mélenchon is extraordinarily popular. And it is another huge rally that he's held. Paris, of course, last weekend, and then we've got Marseille this weekend. For somebody like Mélenchon, he is, again, this kind of candidate who is really trying to make, and increasingly as he speaks about this, trying to make the election a kind of referendum on France's social policies. We mentioned about Zemmour and his attachments because of how this has been kind of framed by the war in Ukraine. Of course, Jean-Luc Mélenchon has also got this slightly checkered kind of relationship with admiration for Putin and all the rest of it. Of course, that's one of the difficulties for somebody like Mélenchon, who is this kind of stage of the radical left. He's been there a good few times around the block now. And that has drawn him to kind of sometimes quite challenging positions throughout his period. So for somebody like Mélenchon, he's probably probably more likely to kind of soft pedal some of the international implications of his policy. He's still talking about withdrawing from NATO. He's still talking about doing all these things, and instead focus on this idea of making this a referendum on France's social policies, where of course we know that he wants to, of course, lower the retirement age in comparison to Emmanuel Macron. We see him talking about teachers' salaries, about increasing minimum wages across the board. This is very much the platform of his campaign, a discussion around reframing what France does and reinvesting in France's social model. So he is still pushing this idea of the useful vote, of trying to appeal to people across the left to give themselves an option in that first round. And that is really the big stick that Mélenchon is playing at the moment. And we mentioned, of course, Zemmour's kind of momentum, you might say, is very much on the decline. As we are 2 weeks out from the election, it very much seems that Mélenchon continues to crest something of a wave, and he is certainly the most prominent figure of the left at the moment. Other figures, of course, we had another big rally at the weekend for Yannick Jadot, a big kind of ecologist rally. He still faces a little bit of criticism for being too sensible, you know. People see him as too much the man who knows politics, knows governance. We even got people like Daniel Cohn-Bendit saying, of course, what somebody like Jadot needs to do is kind of lose that kind of that kind of sensible posture, take off the tie, show the Greenpeace campaigner he is, and kind of have that.
Andrew, I'm going to have to interrupt you because I want to get in the middle as well, and we're running out of time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Emmanuel Macron's the other man we want to talk about today. I mean, he's still riding high in the polls, but he's had a bit of a hiccup this week, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. So Macron continues to rise high in the polls, continues to feel the benefit of that kind of Ukraine effect. Of course, the wartime rally as people look to him. He is, of course, kind of clean of those types of associations with any kind of, Moscow politics and all the rest of it. But where the difficulties for him have arisen this week in politics is this kind of mini scandal which is starting around the use of consultants during his 5-year term so far. They talk about over 1,600 projects so far, big consultancy reliance right across his cabinet, but particularly for the American firm McKinsey. Now, the difficulty with that, there's nothing wrong with the firm in and of itself, except for the fact that they didn't pay any corporation tax in France for about a decade, which Macron claims to be shocked by. Now, that was for big things like the Tech for Good summit, its strategic ideas. Macron's leaning heavily on the fact this was about kind of responses to the health crisis, but it's something that needs to be addressed because for his competitors, it plays into that idea of the president of the rich and all the rest of it. And that is still remaining the big danger for Macron. We saw a rally this weekend from some of the ministers in his government talking about the dangers of abstention, trying to kind of vivify his electorate, talk about that danger, the need to rally and the need to push for that. As we are 2 weeks out from the election, people get through their letterbox, those new kind of mail outs. We'll start to see it in the kind of, on the notice boards in towns and villages all over France. And this is the moment that Emmanuel Macron really needs to re-spark and kind of engage the French public in order to win round that new mandate for another term.
Andrew, good to talk to you as ever. Andrew Smith joining us there from Chichester University, summing up where we are with the election campaign. As I say, in 2 weeks' time, we'll be talking to Andrew and finding out who is in the second round. That's to come on France 24. Stay with us for it, of course.